Good morning, everyone, again. The onion metaphor, maybe based on that, we'll be able to have a better understanding, especially of the terminologies, because we want our students to use the correct terminologies, especially when they are writing their research projects and so on. I think I found many times, yeah, and not only our students, but most people sometimes you confuse some of these terminologies, and you may find that they don't even mean the same thing, the commonly one which you normally confuse and there's different meaning is the research methodology and also the research approach. Those are the two different terminologies. But through this session of today, we'll try to understand each one of these terminologies so that when we use them, we know that we are using them in a correct way. I've put some few outcomes there. The first one, definitely, I've said we need to be able to define a research design. Yeah, at least we'll be able to have understand what a research design is. I think most of us, we are familiar about the research design, and also describe the characteristics of the research design. In other words, all those components that are there in the research design. And then from there, we'll try to go deep into this metaphor of the onion so that we look at some of those research design within the onion itself. Then I think if we are able to do that, then we could have done better for today. Well, various authors, they define the concept of research design. And I think most of us, we are familiar about this concept because most of the time when we do our writing up, okay, especially if you are doing your honors, then you're writing a report or your master's or PhD, we always have a chapter which you call it the research design, right? And sometimes we just call it the research design and methodology. We avoid to say research design and research methodology. So we avoid to repeat the word research, all right? But basically, when you look at the research design, that is the heart of your study, because that's where you are going to share us about the various designs which you have applied in your studies, okay? So in most of the time, some of the aspects which are there on the we are going to talk about on the metaphor, they form part of the research design. Okay, so what is the research design? Well, Bobby and Morton, they state that the research design refers to the blueprint or the way in which a study is structured to conduct it successfully. In other words, when you look at your research design, you need to tell us what are those research designs. Okay, and remember that when you look at research methodology, it's more of a stand-alone main heading within that chapter 3 of yours or 4. Okay, but the research design, we are going to look at various aspects. For example, we are going to look at the issue of the philosophy. We are going to look at the issue of your research philosophy, by the way. We are going to look at the issue like your research paradigm, okay? And you're going to look at the issue of the aspect like the research approach. Those are some of the aspects that comes under the research design, okay? But Newman states that research design aims to provide a plan or strategy with practical value in order to answer questions regarding social problems. Basically, it is a structural framework consisting of various research methods and techniques that a researcher could utilize. I think I've indicated even those techniques and so on, or those structures which comes under the research design. And this helps a researcher to pursue their research journey into an unknown terrain with an assistance of systematic approach. I think one of the things which you need to do most of the time when you write a chapter, like I've said, I think last week, make sure that you have an outline. If your outline says chapter 3, research design and methodology. So indicate all those aspects which you are going to include. For example, the first main point there is going to be the research design, where you explain or define what research design is. Then from there, you indicate maybe the first research design there. Let's say it's your philosophy. Then you describe what philosophy is and so on, and also the different types of philosophies. Then from there, you tell us which philosophy does your research align to, because it's very important to give all of this aspect of research philosophy is good, but at the end of the day, we want the one which touches more on or align more into your studies. Then explore more on that one. Okay, basically, if you look at the research design, it is a strategy that you have developed to implement your plan. Okay, so now in order for us to go further, there are different characteristics of the research design. I just want to look at them quickly there. If you look at these characteristics, definitely they tell you that you can approach your research design in various ways, okay? And these characteristics, even though I've tried to put them in a different way there with figures, but at the end of the day, when you look at these characteristics, you'll be able to know which one is aligning to your research design. But your research design, definitely, you can decide to approach it in different ways where you describe all the elements. Okay, I'll come back to that slide again. I just want to quickly come to this one. The important point is that I'm not sure in your case, guys, maybe you need to assist me here. You and I, you know what an onion is, okay? And I think it's one of the, I think it's a vegetable, okay? Yeah, it's one of those vegetables when you work with. Sometimes you don't enjoy the journey, to peel an onion, sometimes well, there are different people that do it different ways. Others, they'll say, no, in order for it to give the uncertain aspect about it, you need to put it in the water and so on, so that when you peel it out, it doesn't even irritate you a lot. Others, they'll tell about other methods and all of those things. But peeling this, definitely, you can't go and get the inner layer. You need start to peel out the outer layers. As you are peeling it and you're going through this onion, then you'll be able to reach the inner layer. Okay? And as you reach the inner layer, it's where you could have finished or completed the peeling process of this onion. You can't start from the inner layer and go to the outer layer. The same thing with our research. Okay, and it's one thing which most of our students are doing currently, and that's why when we work on their work, we end up having a lot of drafts, maybe more than 3 or 4 drafts in a chapter, especially when they write their research report. Because when you come to the chapter, especially the chapter of research design and methodology, it's a chapter which is more practical. But what students are doing now, they write that chapter, even though they even went out and collected their data and analyzed their data. Then that's why they struggle a lot, because they are talking about something which they have not done. They write as if they are writing a proposal, of which they're supposed to report to say when the collection of your data went in this way, or data collection, for example, how did you collect your data, you describe your instrument, and so on and so on and so on. And how did you analyze the data? Then you also tell us maybe the tool you've used and all of those things. In others, you're reporting. Okay, so now what they normally do, some of those students, in other words, now within the onion itself, they go to the inner layer. They don't start with the outer layer. So the same thing here, if you look at this research design, if you position it and try to understand through this metaphor of an onion, you'll be able to start by peeling the outer layer. I think most of us, we know what the metaphor is. Okay, sometimes we use this terminology and we take it for granted. Basically, a metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an objection or action to which it is not literally applicable. In other words, we are not saying that research design, it is an onion. No, but we use a figure of speech to understand the research design. Hence, we use an onion as a metaphor. Okay, and basically, it's more about a thing which is regarded as representative or a symbol of something else. You know, that's a metaphor. So there are these layers which you get in this onion metaphor. What are those layers? I think we have tried to put all those layers there. The first one, definitely, all of us, you can see it there. It is the research philosophy. Then you move to your research approach. Then you have the methodological choice. That's your methods, by the way. Then you have the research strategy. Okay. Then you also have the time horizon. Then the data collection and analysis. Okay. So those are the layers which we will be focusing on them and try to understand each layer. And remember that as you are going through all of these terminologies or these layers, they need, most of the time, they align to certain methodologies or research studies. If, for example, I'm more on quantitative, definitely, insofar as the research philosophy which I will use, it should be aligning to quantitative. The same thing with the approach, definitely is going to be quantitative. It's going to be the method is going to be quantitative, and also the approach, it should also align to quantitative. And also your research strategy also should be aligned to quantitative, and so on and so on. So all those things, they need to align to each other. Okay. Otherwise, if you start to tell us that your research study is more focused on qualitative, then you start to indicate the research approach, which are not talking to qualitative, then it becomes a problem now. And like I said last week, I think even yesterday when I was preparing some of the slides, I've said, I think our students, we need to start to get them use textbook as much as possible. It could be e-textbook, could be textbook which you get from the library. Let's use textbook when you write some of these aspects in research. Because sometimes when you use articles sometimes they have been diluted a lot. Many people, they paraphrase the articles. Okay, so now the concept sometimes end up losing its own meaning. So if you get it from the original textbook of research, then from there you understand it from that premises, it works better for you as a student. Okay, so I'm not saying that you must go and buy a lot of textbook, guys. We have textbook available from the libraries, you know that. Okay. Well, let's look at the first layer. I think the first layer talks about the research philosophy. Okay. Let's try to understand what the research philosophy is. Also have some few notes for me here. Okay. Basically, the research philosophy is the foundation of any study. That's your philosophy. That's your foundation. Okay. It describes the set of beliefs the research is built upon. But these philosophies also, they can be described from an ontological point of view. Okay, and also they can be described from the epistemological point of view. Okay, and sometimes we call it epistemology. Okay, let's look at these two types of point of view. Okay, your ontological point of view, it comes from the word ontology, which is what and how of what we know. In other words, in ontology, we are talking about the things which we know and how much we know about them. For example, does reality exist as a single objective thing, or is different for each person? That's ontology. In other words, the reality can be interpreted to say, maybe we look at reality from different perspective, from different point of view. For me, reality could mean this and that, but from another person's point of view, reality could mean something. Okay. In other words, we interpret some of these aspects differently. But when you look at epistemology, it's about how we can obtain knowledge, okay, and come to understand things. In other words, when you look at epistemology, it's about knowledge gaining or obtaining of the knowledge. Then we want to gain certain knowledge so that you'll be able to understand certain points. All right. In other words, if I want to talk about something which it's in a certain discipline, I need to acquire knowledge about that. And that is epistemology. Then you need to learn, you need to read and do all those things. So in a nutshell, but when you go to the book of the Force, I think I've put it as a reference there. It talks more about what these 2 points means in detail. But there are main research philosophies which we need to look at, okay, according to this layer. We are going to look at what is positivism, interpretivism, pragmatism, critical realism, and postmodernism. So those are the few philosophies we are going to look at them. And already, if you look at them at the face value, they tell you already, okay? They tell you to say, look at the second one, interpretivism. It already tells you that it is aligned to a certain research methodology. Okay, and definitely you cannot say interpretivism. It aligns to quantitative methods. It doesn't. All right, you can't say you have used interpretivism philosophy, whereas your study is qualitative. It's quantitative, so to say that, okay? Definitely it has to align with qualitative, because in qualitative is where you interpret so that you'll be able to get an understanding, okay? So already we are trying to position all this type of research philosophy where they belong to, okay? Let's quickly look at them in detail and see how far we can go with them. The first philosophy which we want to look at is a positivism. Colleagues, some of these words they are very difficult to pronounce. Yeah, I know, but I've tried my best. If you know that the positivist, the research takes the view that knowledge exists outside of what's being studied. In other words, what is being studied can only be done so objectively. Okay? In other words, when you look at positivism, it also has to do with objectivity. It's not subjective. Okay? And it cannot include opinions, personal viewpoints. The researcher doesn't interpret, they only observe. In other words, it tells you that this philosophy of positivism, it is aligning to quantitative, because you are not going to interpret, you observe, okay? It therefore states that there is only one reality. That's what positivism is all about. There are no other point of view about this reality. It's only one reality, okay? Knowledge can only be acquired through empirical research, which is based on measurement and observation. But if we can look at that, at this statement, it says knowledge can only be acquired through empirical research. Think about the mixed method research now. If you collect your data and you collect your main quantitative data and you analyze and try to understand your quantitative data, that quantitative data can also be used to inform your qualitative data collection. In other words, based on that empirical evidence which you have, all those data set which you have, and after you've analyzed it, you can say, no, I still need to know more about my participant. So in other words, now I move from the positivism stance which is aligning to quantitative, then I move to qualitative now, where I want more interpretation of this data. Maybe sometimes we find that you have done some analysis of your data in quantitative, but you still want to know more from your participant. Then it's where you design now a qualitative data collection instrument. So you can play around all of this, but I'm talking about if, for example, you are using mixed method research, okay? But now, definitely, let's understand this concept of positivism as we are looking at the quantitative studies and so on, okay? The last point there, it says knowledge can only be true, false, or meaningless. But when you look at interpretivism, which is the second layer of the research philosophy, it emphasizes the influence that social and cultural factors can have on an individual. It also focuses on people's thoughts and ideas in light of the social-cultural backdrop. The researcher plays an active role in the study. In other words, now you are not saying that it's only one knowledge or one reality. You say, no, this reality can be interpreted and based on the understanding and the thoughts and beliefs or ideas of your participant. And that is qualitative, okay, where you interpret knowledge, okay. When you try to come, you say that, sorry, when you say there is no one knowledge, you can interpret the ideas. You can say to yourself as a researcher, I want to know more about my participant. And that's why when you do your data collection, I think we've spoken about a lot, you could also go to an extent of probing your participant because you want to get their thoughts. Sometimes they'll give answers which are not even relevant to the question you are asking. So in order for you to get the real deep understanding about the participant in response to a certain question, you go further and ask them, you probe them, of which you can do it in your quantitative studies. The other concept in regard to research philosophy, it is your pragmatism. This is pragmatism highlights the importance of using the best tools possible to investigate phenomena. In other words, you become more practical now. You know, you use a correct data collection tool, and this approach, it further says, approach research from a practical point of view, where knowledge is not fixed, but instead is constantly questioned and interpreted. It consists of an element of researcher's environment. It is also characterized by the relation of theory and praxis, which is practical. It includes philosophers who take either objective or subjective view of ontology, but all adapt to a subjective epistemology that emphasizes the relation between knowledge and action. In other words, pragmatism, research philosophy, it's about doing things practical. You know, you are on the environment itself, okay, or on the, as a researcher, you are there on site, okay. Knowledge is trust full to the extent that is successful in guiding action. In other words, what they are saying that the theory which you have about a certain knowledge, it becomes more useful if you put it in a practical environment. So that's why we have this philosophy of pragmatism. Then the other one, the other philosophy, it is called critical realism. I think I've shared this slide sometime, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, when you look at critical realism, there are two of them. The first one is referred to as empirical realism, where it says reality is constrained to the observable. In other words, you are able to understand reality if you observe it. Okay, it's almost like, for example, as we as researchers, what you normally do. Why do you go, you design your research study, you put whatever plan you have, but you go and also collect data. Why? Because you want to get the reality about a certain study. That's why you go and meet or collect data from your participants. Reality consists of the observable and ensure deep or complex level which science is meant to uncover. That is critical realism. So if already it tells you, regard this philosophy of critical realism, to say it aligns more to a certain methodology. Okay? And all of us will know it could align to maybe, hopefully, it could be qualitative, if I'm not mistaken. Or sometimes could be, I think it could be more on quantitative. Okay? Because quantitative also allow you to get the real aspect about things. In other words, you become more, the information you are getting, it informs your study also. Look at this example. I've just put this example to understand this concept of critical realism and so on. I said, example of two plants. Let's say you have plant A, you store it inside the cupboard. Okay. Then you also have the second plant and you place it outside the house. So what's going to happen with these two plants? I think it's one of the exercise which most of us we did in our primary school level. I can still remember that one, you know, where through our we used to call them. I can't remember what we used to call this subject at primary, you know, where you do some science there and there. But yeah, we will do this as an example. Sometimes they will say, okay, you take a chart, then that chart, what you do, you have different types of leaves, then you paste on the chart. Then after you have pasted on the chart, you cover the chart with a plastic. Then the other chart, you have a different types of leaves, then you paste them on the chart, but you don't cover them with a plastic. So you can notice there will be a difference there, okay? The same thing with this one. If this plant is inside the cupboard, definitely the plant, it won't grow as we anticipate because there's a lot of things with the plant does not get there. Okay? I think sunlight is one of them. Maybe also it doesn't even have enough oxygen. So all those things, okay? But the other one is you put it outside, that plant, it can blossom. So it tells you that there is a reality here. Well, scientists can tell you about that reality. Okay, they can talk about maybe all those things like lack of water and all of those things. So, but what I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, we need to start to understand this philosophy. There is a critical realism. The critical realism is that definitely the one which we have stored inside the cupboard, it's not going to last because there are things which are missing or there are things which this plant does not get. But if you look at critical realism, philosophy is based on the philosophy of science, ontology, and epistemology, along with the concept of what constitutes an explanation. It also focuses on developing theoretical explanation. It holds the view that the theory of knowledge is different from a theory of being. Think about that one. What that says now. In other words, it says that critical realism, it tells you that there is no one reality. You can interpret the reality. Like I've tried to do with this example of two plants. Someone can interpret it differently, is it? Your understanding and interpretation of these two plants, the outcome, what's going to happen, you can have your own interpretation and read. So that it becomes more qualitative in that sense. It holds the view that theory of knowledge is different from theory of being. It can be applied to social sciences as well as natural sciences. I think most of the time it's more applicable to, yeah, hopefully natural sciences. But also, social sciences will always come in sometimes. Let's look at the fifth research philosophy. I think that's an interesting one. I thought on how to present this research philosophy of postmodernism. I thought about on how to present it. So I came with these colleagues. This figure, please, it doesn't appear anywhere. Okay, I didn't take it from anywhere. I just thought maybe the understanding will be much better here if I put it that way. But look at them. Postmodernism is the idea that reality is not mirrored in human understanding, but rather constructed as individuals find their own reality. Reality is not mirrored in human understanding, but it could be, or it is constructed as individuals find their own reality. Let's make it simple. One, Rio 2019. I'm just making that example. And I'll try to align it to our discipline as much as possible. Some of you are teachers. We were conducting teaching in different ways. And the way we're conducting teaching, we thought that teaching should confine itself within the four walls. In other words, we thought that teaching need only to take place in a classroom. That's what we understand about teaching. To say you cannot teach any learner or any student outside the classroom. They must be in the classroom. Then let's fast forward it. In other words, that's the reality we understood. Nothing else. Then 2020, in our case, right? Well, in other countries, those things started in 2019. Basically, 2020 or 2019, COVID came in. It came in COVID. It started, definitely COVID came in 2019, definitely. You know that what happened with China, they did try to suppress it and all of this and so on. But 2020, they could not suppress it. Then it came even to us. Then the reality now, it became a different reality now. In other words, we have to construct something now. Because we are now in 2020. Here is COVID now. Teaching and learning must continue. So we have to move from the notion or the premises on which we understand reality about teaching. To say the four walls, they must be there. There must be a teacher there. All right? Then we're moving to another premises now. In other words, now we find a new reality. To say, no, teaching can also happen beyond the confinement of the four walls of a classroom. And we came with technology. That's where we are today, is it? So in order to understand postmodernism, we need to understand that we can construct reality so that we align it to the current situation. We don't know what's going to happen, colleagues, going forward. but there will be a lot of changes. Authors are writing even now. I think some of you have read about those. Some of them, they'll argue that there is no technology which is going to replace a teacher. That's what they're saying now. Okay? Of which we hope so. But even though there is no technology which can replace a teacher, there will come a time now, you may find that going forward, I'm just thinking, I don't know if it's going to happen, where in a school, for example, if in a class there are 30 learners, they can be taught through artificial intelligence. In other words, you may find that maybe you have, I'm thinking loud here. We have 3 groups of grades. Let's say grade 4, A, B, and C. You may find that those grades are being taught by only one teacher. It's possible. I think it's happening even now. You can agree with me? We use the smart board. I'm sitting here now, but I'm able to reach, I can reach almost 300 learners once through technology. So, yeah, but we need to look at it from that angle. That's an explanation I'm having there. But basically, when you look at post-modernism, those people, they believe that realities are subject to change and that apparent realities are actual social constructs which limits individuals. The other aspect about postmodernism is the idea that reality is not mirrored in human understanding, spoken about that one, and so on and so on. Yeah, all right. But let's look at this. Let's understand the origin of postmodernism. I've just given you an example about COVID, where we're in 2019 and where we came to in 2020 and so on for the past 3 years and all of those things. But look at this now. Understanding it the case of industrial revolution. Okay? And sometimes the concept of industrial revolution and the 4th industrial revolution, it came more prominent recently. And it's not a new thing, by the way. Well, some of these things, if they are not being articulated by scholars, we will never know about them. Right? I think most of us, we know. I'm not saying that is the only person, but for my side and to some of the institution, the person who articulated more about 4th industrial revolution. I think it's a former VC of University of Johannesburg. He came with the 4th industrial revolution. It doesn't mean that it was not there, but it articulated to such extent it even landed up in the ministry and so on. But what I'm trying to say is, let's understand now this postmodernism based on this industrial revolution. Remember that we have, please, my colors, I'm not saying that if I talk about pre-modern, if I put red, it's just so bad. No, I'm just trying to use the color so that we can see the difference. Okay, I'm speaking about pre-modern so that I can understand where postmodernism comes from. It must come from somewhere. In other words, we didn't have modernization before. That's why I refer to it as pre-modernization. And that pre-modernization, or pre-modern, if I can put it that way, according to the figure, it was characterized by these 3 industrial revolutions. It was the first, the second, and the 3rd industrial revolution. Okay? And when you look at the first industrial revolution, I think it happened around, it was around the 18th century, where there was a lot of mechanization, and also the steam engine also comes in and so on. But when you move now to the 2nd industrial revolution, within the pre-modern itself, there was a little bit of electrification. There was also the electrical engines which were coming in. But the 3rd industrial revolution, which happens, I think it was in the 20th century, what happens, we started to see more automation. We started to see globalization. Computers also came in there, and internet. And it was around 1980s, by the way. In countries like, for example, US and all of this, they had that in the 1970s, by the way. Think about South Africa. When did some of us start to use computers in our teaching and learning? It started late. Maybe in your case, because some of you were just new teachers and all of this. But what I'm trying to say, others, we started to use them late. In my case, when I started to use computer in my teaching, it was in 2000, and I still remember, 2007. That's when I started. Then we move now to the fourth industrial revolution. I think it's the one we are still in, but other theorists, they are already predicting the fifth industrial revolution. And they also have an idea what it's going to encompass this. But look at the fourth industrial revolution. I've put it green, honestly. It started to open our eyes. Think about the example I gave about COVID. If we're not on the fourth industrial revolution within the 21st century, I don't know how we are going to survive. I don't know what we are going to use. In other words, schools were going to be closed for 3 years because we could not liaise with our students. But because we're on the fourth industrial revolution within the 21st century, technology is there. Artificial intelligence. Yeah. Some of you guys, you know about all those artificial tools, which they can even write a thesis for you. I'm not sure if it's possible. We have robotics. We have also digitalization. Everything's been digitalized nowadays. I'll give you a simple example. We're still, I think, pre-modern. We're thinking that if, for example, we have our, I'm just making that call, please, I don't want to be quoted out of context, but we're thinking that if we are not happy about service delivery in our communities, we need to go and target the infrastructure. We ban it, we do all of this. Why? Because I think we're thinking that when we ban those infrastructure, all the archives will be gone. That's our thinking, of which is not now in the 21st century. We have technology now. Some of the archives are there on the cloud. You know more than me, by the way, with technology. The archives are on the cloud. In my position now, I think that for me to be safe, I must make sure that everything I put it in my UPS. Someone will tell you there's no need for that. If you put something on OneDrive, it's there on the cloud. If your computer crashes, you are able to recall that information again. So it means now there is a lot of modernization. Then when you look at the next, industrial revolution, the fifth one, they anticipate that there will be more of personalization, right? And also there will be more innovation. There will be lot of inclusivity, and also there will be a lot of deep cooperation between the people and the machines. In other words, there is no one who's going to be laid off. We are going to cooperate with all of this machine because somewhere you as a human being, you are needed to design that machine, right? So I think those are the few aspects I want to share. Then when you look at the last point there, I've spoken about the approaches to postmodernism. It could be historical. I think I've given some of the historical aspect there, and also the stylistic and also theoretical. You can read about all of those things. Maybe let's move to the second layer. Now we go to this layer now, the research approach. I think I've been vocal about the research approach a lot. I don't know why, because I've realized that and sometimes what you normally do when you get a student give you a chapter, then a student say, maybe as a heading, says the research approach. Then the student says, in the study, I'm going to use qualitative approach as this and that and that. So you correct there and there if possible. But we need to understand that what is a research approach, okay? There are three types of main research methods. We know about them: inductive, sorry, qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. Then the research approach, there are also three. It's your inductive, we spoke about that, I think, in one of the presentations, and deductive, and also adaptive approach. So those are the approaches which you need to talk about. Let's quickly look at each one of them, not in detail. I think we've touched on them a lot. The research approach is the broader method you'll use for your research, that it's either deductive or inductive or abductive, all right? Most of the time we use the first two. The deductive approach, it begins with a theory. In other words, deductive approach, there is a theory, okay? And aim to build on it through research. Or you want to test that theory, okay? In other words, there's already a theory there. You want to test it. If I'm doing quantitative studies, it aligns to deductive because there's already theory. If I come with my hypothesis to say this needs to happen in order for this to happen, there's a theory there. Okay? I don't need to come with something new. The theory is already there. But I want to test it now. And how do I test it? Maybe I'll be able to run some statistical tests and so on. Okay? To test this theory or to test this hypothesis. An example? No. Let me go to the next point there. It says quantitative research tends to reflect a deductive approach. I've spoken about that one. It's also aligned to positivism philosophy. In other words, if you talk about positivism philosophy, then you must know that it's about quantitative methods and also it's about deductive approach. Can be inductive, okay? So all those things, they must talk to each other. I think I've got a simple example there. Testing a theory of resilience from students who are from the disadvantaged background. How do we test this theory of resilience? You do a quantitative study. You collect data, from there you analyze data, then you can even do some differential stats to test if this theory does exist in those designed indigenous communities and so on. Okay. Inductive approach, it entails generating theory from research. In other words, inductive, there is no theory which is existing. Okay? Simple example there, then I said, can be used in an isolated community where there is little knowledge about it. Then, based on the research from this community, a theory could be developed. In other words, you have a concept, and that concept is being used in certain communities. And after you have tried to get the understanding of that communities, then you can try to formulate a theory around it. Okay? In other words, there was no theory. And I think I've used an example of Ubuntu in the past. There was no theory of Ubuntu. It was just people trying to, in fact, our communities were doing things differently, you know, as communities where, if, for example, we are in good state, we assist each other, even though we are in good standing, we also assist each other. So someone said, I think that is humanity. Then from there, they translate. People try to translate it to the African languages and so on. Then the theory of Ubuntu came to say, we have a theory of Ubuntu. And that's why you can explain the theory in different ways if you understand the concept. Okay? So there was nothing about that. But through understanding the knowledge and the way that communities exist, and aligned to each other, we end up coming with the theory of Ubuntu, right? And someone came with the theory of Resume last time in one of my engagement with the students, and I've tried to understand the theory from the student. And it's about more of empowerment, to say, for example, it's better to empower people, all right? And there's a nice phrase, honestly, where we say it is better to teach a person to fish, okay? And if you teach that person to fish, you are empowering that person to say, okay, in future, you can do it on your own. It's more like a theory of resume. It works around that. So you can go and check it if it's applicable to your studies. But what I'm trying to say is that it's more broader theory, which talks about more about empowerment. But when you look at abductive, basically it starts from a set of facts and also infers the most likely hypothesis to explain the phenomena. All right, but most of the time, colleagues, I've read, in fact, I haven't seen any student to have used this approach. Most of the time, we use the two approach. Okay, so we can just go and research about it, and if you feel that you can use it in your study, then you can also apply that approach in your study. How to decide on the right approach to your study? Assess the type of research you aim to conduct. Ask yourself whether your research will build on something that exists, all right? If your research is building on something which is already there, then you can decide to use the deductive approach. Whether you will be investigating something that cannot necessarily be rooted in previous research, then you can also think about inductive to say, now I'm researching about something which has not been researched about. Okay? Yes, it could have been researched about maybe globally in other countries, but within the South African context, we find that there's not been researched about. So then you can do inductive. Don't you think so? An inductive approach is going to give you more leeway so that you understand this concept better, because it is from unknown to known. Then there'll be a little bit more of a gap. And now I understand it better. It's better to do inductive, which is more qualitative studies. Okay, I think I'm not saying, colleagues, when you do quantitative studies, you could not identify the gap. There could be a gap. But think about inductive approach, where it applies to qualitative studies. You can even probe your participant further to get their understanding, because this aspect has not been done or investigated before. All right. Like I've said with you guys, the chapter I've published, I think this last month, if I'm not mistaken, I think it aligned to that, because my study basically is about understanding name giving across generation. How generation give their newly borns names, and focusing on a certain culture. Many studies have been about that, name giving in different cultures. We know that. But looking at generational gap, I haven't seen any study done about that. When I was doing my research and all of this, I could not find anything. There is a gap. But how do I get my data there? I can't get my data with quantitative. There's no way. Let me use qualitative. Then it was more inductive. So yeah, think about all these things, colleagues. I'm not trying to own you, but I'm just saying it's better to come with something which has not been done or been researched. I was thinking about one topic. I'm not sure if some of you have read about it. In our schools nowadays, we have what you call assistant teachers. Is there any research which has been done about them currently? I'm not talking about the secular. No. Research. I'm hoping other students in other universities are doing that. Just understand this, the assistant teachers in detail. Just to do research about it. Maybe it's an international concept, by the way, or phenomena. Okay, because I've read something I think a week ago where the assistant teachers in that country, they had a lot of questions and they were not happy because I think that article, and I should have saved that article, I don't know why. In that article, what they are saying is that there's a lot of challenges in regards to their remuneration and all of these things, and you know all those things. And when you look at some of them, it was more of a qualitative article. They have to interview them. Some of them, they've been in years doing that assistant teaching processes for years. Not only 1 year, then from there, the following year, they take another group. No. For years. So you can see that it's one of the things which other countries are doing. They take it serious. It's not just a once-off to say, okay, this year we take this group, next year we take another group, and all of this. I'm not complaining, but what I'm trying to say, it is a serious job, if I can put it in that way. But yeah, maybe look at that. Or maybe you can ask a friend of yours in your school to do a research around that, maybe. Maybe we can have something about that. I think we've covered a lot about the 2 layers. Let's go to the 3rd layer. I think the 3rd layer is about the research strategy. Colleagues, it's one of those aspects also. There's a lot happening about this. Sometimes we use different concepts, but the understanding is not good. If you can look at this now, I just want to go to this, to my onion. We are here now. These are the strategies. Okay? You can use a strategy which you call experimental, a survey, a case study. Okay? Sometimes we use this too, is it? It's a survey, a case study. Okay? Then we have ethnography, narrative, grounded theory, action research. Am I correct? Then the other one is, you must know that my eyes now give me a problem now. I think it's about archival research. Yeah, it's archival. So let's quickly look at each one of them briefly so that you understand them better. The approaches could be as follows. Experimental. In experimental, you must know that there is a causal relationship between 2 or more variables. Experimental involves manipulating one variable, which is your independent variable, to observe a change in another variable. That is a dependent variable. Okay? You see in the example there at the bottom, I have the independent variable and also the dependent variable. And remember that most of the time, when you talk about dependent variable and independent variable, then it means you need to come up with a hypothesis, isn't it? Okay? So you are going to have a hypothesis. Assess the relationship between variables, okay? The purpose of experimental research is to support, refute, or validate a research hypothesis. Okay, there it is, okay? This research strategy follows the principle of the scientific method and is conducted within a controlled environment or a setting. For example, a laboratory. How do you have sort of it's not an experiment, okay? Because experiment definitely it has to do with natural sciences. There should be a lab and all of those things. We know that. But think about this aspect now. You can also apply it, especially in social sciences. How do you apply it in social sciences, like education? Let's say your research is about reading, okay? You want to check on understand the reading of a certain group of your students. So how can you apply that? You can say you have pre-understanding, right? Or we have pre-intervention. I can put it that way, right? Where you assess them now. How good are they and all of this. Then based on that, you move to the intervention now. So, okay, based on the pre-intervention, your assessment, they lack this area in regards to their reading. Now you put an intervention, okay, to address that assessment which you have done. Then after you've put the intervention, then you look if this intervention has a positive aspect. Then you have the next stage, which you call the post-intervention. In other words, now, what you are doing, it's a sort of, I'm not saying it's an experiment, please call it, you can't say it's an experiment. You cannot experiment with human beings, by the way. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is that your understanding could be put in those layers. Then you can, but at the end of the day, what you need to say, you need to argue to say, maybe the post intervention, when you write your report, all right, you need to indicate that your intervention, even though there was a bit of improvement in their reading capabilities or abilities and so on, it was not influence of one aspect. In other words, it doesn't mean that if you have that intervention with them, then they're starting to have a better reading capabilities and so on. It was not because of you alone or your intervention. There are other variables you can also include there. So in other words, you can also try to apply it in social sciences. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud here. And I think most of people who are doing, especially aspect regarding to reading, they do that. They do post-intervention, then they have intervention, then no, they do pre-intervention, then intervention and post-intervention. That's how we do it. So because you cannot only just do intervention, then you tell us about post-intervention. What was the pre-intervention? What have you done? What assessment did you have with them and all of those things and so on? Did you give them some maybe sample to write before you intervene? Then from there, based on that, you analyze the writings. Then from there, you intervene and so on. Okay, maybe look at this example. And remember that, colleagues, this research strategy of experimental, it aligns to deductive. We know that, by the way, is it? Yes, it's more deductive. This is an example there. It says, well, the philosophy could be positivism. Okay. In other words, we have the research philosophy. We have the research strategy. Then the approach is also there. Okay. The approach becomes deductive. A hypothesis that a certain brand of food, of dog food, sorry, can increase a dog's protein. Then this hypothesis could be tested through an experimental research. You could have control group where there's no change in your dog's diet. You give them the same diet. Then you have an experimental or treatment group, all right, where you feed them a specific brand. So that you want to test this hypothesis to say a certain brand of dog food can increase the dog's protein. In other words, you do those two tests. You have your control group where you give your dog the same brand, right, or the same diet. Then you go and have an experimental one where you feed them a specific brand now, so that you can check this hypothesis. And it's, I think it's more, if you can put it more in a practical way. Those who have pets, like dog, cats, and so on, we give them the same brand, is it? And sometimes we are even skeptical to give them another brand. If you change, sometimes they say they're used to this brand, then you give them another brand. You can even see the reaction from them, from that pet. All right. Some of them, they don't even consume the new brand. They want that brand. So it says something. Okay. We also have another strategy, could be action research. Okay. And when we talk about action research, it already tells you that it aligned to qualitative studies. Okay. Because you need to be there and engage with your participant. Sometimes we call it participant action research. It is conducted in a practical setting. It also helps to inform researchers of problems or weaknesses related to interaction within the real world. It's strongly focusing on the participant. It is generally applied in the social sciences. We like it more in social sciences. And I know that people who are doing, especially humanities, they like it a lot. Well, even us in education, we do like it a lot. Right? It's commonly adopted in quantitative studies. In other words, it's about qualitative studies. It makes use of language and interaction rather than statistics and numbers. In other words, you want to get a deeper understanding and meaning, which is more in weights. Okay, that's why we come with themes and all of those things. An example of participatory or of participant action research is a community engagement initiative, for example, gardening. And remember that sometimes with this action research, which we are doing, especially in our communities, they can also lead to other avenues. You know, sometimes when you do some of these community engagement projects, you say, okay, I want to start a gardening with this community here. Maybe you say, okay, I see that most of the people in this area are not doing anything and there's available space there, maybe within the community. Let's go and plant something. But as you are doing these community engagement initiatives, other aspects, they may come up. Okay, you may find that as you are doing it, some of these young people, they have some aspiration and all of this, then you move to another level and so on. I've seen some of the community engagement projects, they started like that and they end up focusing on other areas. A case study, colleagues. Please, I want to say to you guys, when you are saying to us the approach of your research is going to be a case study, please read about what a case study is. Okay, understand the concept of case studies. I think there are a lot of research textbooks which you can visit around that, so to understand what a case study is. And some of those textbooks definitely even give you examples, you know, about case studies and all of those things. But basically, it's a detailed, in-depth study of a single subject. If you say a case study, in others, you're studying a single subject. Okay? In case studies research, the subject is analyzed to gain an in-depth understanding of issues in a real life setting. The objective in the case study research is to gain And in-depth understanding, I think I'm repeating that, understanding within the context of the study, not to generalize the findings. In other words, you want to get a better understanding of this issue in a real setting. In conducting case study research, the social context and culture needs to be accounted or taken into account. Hence, it tends to be inductive in nature. Case studies, definitely, they are aligned to inductive approach. Well, sometimes I'm also that type of a person. Sometimes when I design my research title, I always like to have a heading and a subheading on my research title. Then I'll include the word a case study of this and this, all right? Let's say, for example, perception of teachers about discipline. Then the subheading, I'll say a case study of this and this and this. Okay, but basically, when I go to my actual strategy, I don't use the case study strategy, right? I've seen one student have tried to explore the aspect of the case study strategy. Okay, I use most of the other strategies. Okay, look at grounded theory. Grounded theory is all about letting the data speak for itself. The data inform the development of a new theory, model, or framework. It is useful for research into issues that are completely new or unresearched, okay? And also it is more qualitative and aligned to inductive approach. It tells you, for example, if you look at the third bullet, then I said grounded theory is useful for research into issues that are completely new or under-researched. Remember that the approach of inductive, it means it is unknown to know. So it tells you that you align to an inductive approach. But deductive, it is known to unknown. Then it's the opposite. Okay. Ethnography, it involves observing people in their natural environment and drawing meaning from their cultural interaction. I think I wanted to add something here. When you look at all of this, let's look at these strategies. Experimental strategy, it is deductive. Okay? In other words, it aligns with deductive. Okay? That's experimental. Then you move to the next one. Action, definitely, it's going to be inductive. Yes. The action research, it's inductive. In other words, it is used in the inductive studies. Okay. The case study also, grounded theory, inductive. Ethnography, let's look at it now. I think it should also align to inductive, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. Okay, let's look at it quickly. All right, let's go through we have done the grounded. Let's go to the ethnography. It involves observing people. It's inductive already. It's more inductive. We still have another one. Archival. I think that could be deductive, is it? Could be deductive because you look at the material which are already there. Okay. So it could be. So if you look at all of these approaches, all right, or strategies, if we can put it that way, if you look at all of these research strategies, the only ones which are more aligned to quantitative studies, there are only two. Sorry, guys, I'm moving too much. Sorry for that. There are only two. The rest is inductive. Okay? So when in your writing up, also you need to be careful about all of this, okay? So that you align things as they're supposed to be related, okay? Yeah. Let's look at ethnography quickly. It involves observing people in their natural environments and drawing meaning from their cultural interaction. The objective with ethnography is to capture the subjective experiences of participants to see the world through their eyes. Ethnographers choose a research role that is appropriate for their study. Their roles are the following, according to Macmillan and Schumacher. Observer, we've spoken about the roles in one of the presentations, I remember. The participant. Observer, whereby the researcher is physically and psychologically absent. The participant, whereby the researcher lives through an experience and recollects personal insight. Okay? And if you look at the role, the second role, the participant. In other words, as an ethnographic writer, or as an when you use ethnographic, you may decide to say, in my research, right, I want to be a participant. How do you conduct this strategy of ethnography? There are various ways. I think I've spoken about, I'll come to this example. I've spoken about one colleague who have, on his PhD, he applied the ethnographic stance, if you can put it that way, as a participant. In other words, he shared about his life in his PhD. Okay, so he has to take us through the upbringing and all of this thing and so on. Then you become more of a participant. Then I have this example. I think this example, I thought about this example where I say, as a researcher, you want to tell us about your journey to become the first woman VC in a certain institution. Then it becomes more of an ethnographer who is a participant. Because in that type of a study, you are going to share more about you as a person. You are telling us about your background, about all of those things. It becomes more a study where you put yourself as a center, on the center, in fact, instead of being an observer. Okay, you become a participant. It's been allowed. Participant observers, whereby the researcher becomes part of committee and observes from within. Insider observer, when interpretivist research philosophy and involves an inductive qualitative research approach. In other words, if you look at the insider observer, it is more about inductive and qualitative. Okay. Yeah, I think we need to start to do more of our more of ethnographic studies, honestly. And yeah, so it's one of the angles you can look at for your research, for maybe for your PhD and so on, or your master's. You also have the archival research as the research strategy. How does it work? An archival research strategy draws from materials that already exist. And meaning is then established through a review of this existing data. This method is particularly well suited to historical research and can make use of material such as manuscripts and records. Okay? In other words, your research is based on the existing material. There's no way you are going to try to have any interpretivism, or you're going to try to interview anyone. You are sitting with an existing material. And you can do it. I think I've done one of them, colleagues. I think I've said many times about it. The study I've done on the school code of conduct, where you collected all this school of conduct from, I think it was almost 30 primary schools. I've done that. The material is already there. Then becomes more archival. Okay? But at the end of the day, what I did, I think one of the things which I didn't do, maybe I should have done it. Maybe I should have tried to categorize, to say maybe from this year up to this year. Maybe it could have, yeah, I think that could have been better. But what I did, I just collected the school code of conduct when I was just collecting my data up to that time. Okay, so now maybe if I could do maybe a follow-up on that, I'm not sure, and do a second round about the same research, so that I could even see the trends there from the same school, by the way. But sometimes you are even afraid to go and ask the same document from the same school, because sometimes they will only respond. But that would be a nice study to say, okay, after, I think I've done that in 2015 or 16, I can't remember. After 5 years, then I check where the schools are in regards to their development of their school code of conduct. But it's you can do it in any way in your studies. If you want to do archival research, sometimes it's good to do that. I've seen someone, she's doing that but in medicine, by the way. Okay, yeah. There's someone doing that in medicine for the research, for masters and so on. Okay. The fourth layer, I think some of these aspects in the different layers, we have spoken about many times about them. We just have to spend some few seconds on them. Not so much to be said about them. I think we know that, but we've spoken more about the choices. Okay, sometimes we call it methodologies or methods. Okay, choices is simply about deciding how many data sets, could be quantitative or qualitative, you'll use in your research. It could be, if it's a mono method, or a mixed method, or a multi method. Okay, a mono is where you use one type of a methodology, for example, quantitative or qualitative. A mixed is where you use more than one. A multi-method, I think the multi-methods, most of the time we don't use it most of the time, but it makes use of wider range of approaches with more than just a quantitative and one qualitative. I think the multi-methods, if I can just argue, it's what we call the mixed method research. Remember that the mixed method is where you collect different data sets separate, all right? But when you look at the multi-mix methods, that's why we have sequential, right? To say, okay, I collect quantitative data, okay? And based on the quantitative data, what I do its analysis in detail. Then based on the outcome of my analysis of this quantitative data, that could also inform me to do maybe a qualitative data collection. In other words, based on the results and the findings, then I'll say, no, there's a need for me now to do another data collection method, which is qualitative. Then I'll say, all right, I still need more about this aspect. based on my analysis of data. Then now I design a qualitative data collection instrument. The same thing, it could start to socialize itself with more qualitative, all right, in these mixed methods, then research. Then I can start with qualitative, where I interview participants and so on. Then I analyze my data, and based on my analysis, if there are gaps or other things which I need also to get more information about, then I'll design a quantitative data collection instrument around that. Okay, so it's what we want our students to move to nowadays, to the multi-method. Remember that the mixed method, it involves you only collecting data using two different methodology or methods. That's quantitative and qualitative separately. But your multi methods, which is the mixed method methods, it's where there is an integration now. It's more about integration of both quantitative and qualitative. There's integration. Okay? And I think also Creswell speaks more about this mixed method research. If you can read the books of Creswell, I think he also talks about that. Okay, I think this one was spoken about to say to choose the right method. It depends on some of these aspects, like the nature of your research, the research aims and objectives, the practical viability in respect to what kind of data will you be using, and also the accessibility and so on. So we spoke about that more. The time horizon also, I think the time horizon simply describe how many points in time you plan to collect your data. There's a time horizon, okay? Please don't confuse it with the normal time, you know, okay? But it tells us in regards to the data collection to say how many points of time are you going to collect your data. In your case, I think you do what you call cross-sectional time horizon. What does it mean? It means because you are doing a study, let's say you're going to have a thesis or a dissertation, or maybe you're going to have a portfolio of evidence for your honors. You collect data once. Okay? That it comes more of a cross-sectional time horizon. In other words, you do it once. Then you're done. There's no way you're going to collect another data. If you're doing your master's or your PhD, for example, if you go and collect data, they're using a data collection instrument. If it's quantitative, you do it once, is it? If it's qualitative, you do it once. Then there's what you call cross-sectional studies or time horizon. In cross-sectional time horizon, you collect your data at a certain point in a time, then you're done. Data is collected at one point in time. But people who are doing, most of the time, they are doing some research reports, for example. Or maybe they are trying to understand a set case study or a survey in that case. What they normally do, they collect that data over and over again. If, let's say, I'm just making this as an example. If I want to understand our students insofar as maybe I want to understand, I try to understand my students insofar as their understanding in regards to academic study skills. I'm just making that as an example. At the university, by the way, I'm just making that as an example. But my focus is more on first generation. So what I can do a longitudinal time zone study. In other words, I can collect data over years. Maybe my projection, I want to understand this type of students over 5 years. It means This year, I'll collect data from the group of students. Next year, I'll collect data from other group of students, and also until the 5th year. Then it becomes more of a longitudinal study or time zone study. Okay. In other words, I collect data over a multiple point of time. Then I analyze that data. And in that way, I'll be able to check the trends and so on and so on. I think that's what we normally do most of the time. Someone will say to you in their presentation, I've been working on this project over 20 years. Okay. Maybe on an interval of 2 years or 3 years, a person will collect data. Then from there, he gives the projection to say, these are the things which are happening with this phenomena over 20 years. Then the analysis, it comes there. So it becomes more of a longitudinal time zone or horizon, if I can put it that way. But in your case, because you do it once, that's why they give you an ethical clearance certificate for the duration of your study. And I think now they are even, I'm told that now they're even strict. If they give it over 2 years, if they say it's for 2 years, if you're doing masters, they say over 2 years. Here's the ethical clearance, which is supposed to be used over 2 years. If you overstep, you come to a 3rd year, you need to apply for a new ethical clearance. So you must make sure within that 2 years, you have completed your study with this ethical clearance. In other words, you can't take it to the next year, it's no longer applicable. In the past, I know that in one of the institutions, they used to give an open ethical clearance with no time frames. But now they're giving time frames to the ethical clearance. Maybe we can summarize quickly. I think now we try to put all the things together. Firstly, we spoke about the research philosophy, which talks about the set of beliefs your research is based on. That could be maybe positivism, interpretism, pragmatism, and so on. Then we spoke about the research approaches. The broader method you'll use definitely is your deductive, inductive, and also adaptive, okay? And all these research approaches, they align themselves to the different type of research methods. For example, if you have an inductive, definitely it needs to align to qualitative method. Deductive is going to align to quantitative method. Then we have the research strategies. These are the different research strategies. Basically, it's how you will conduct the research. Are you going to use experimental, action, case study, and so on? Then you have choices, which sometimes refer to the methods. How many methods you'll be using is going to be mono method, mixed method, all right, where you use both quantitative and qualitative, or a multi-mix method where you multi-mix method research where you use integration of both quantitative and qualitative methods. Then you also have your time horizons, the number of points in which you will collect your data. Is it longitudinal or is cross-sectional, and so on. Then the techniques and procedures, we've spoken about that one. Data collection method, data analysis, techniques, sampling strategies, and all of those things. I think we've touched on those. Let's look at a summary of the common philosophies briefly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. We've spoken about the positivism philosophy, the realism philosophy, and also the interpretivism philosophy. We know that positivism philosophy aligned to deductive approach, and also it talks about, you can have a structured questionnaire there. You can also use quantitative data where you have a large sample size. You can generalization in regards to positivism is that implementation into a certain population. For example, you can have a policy and so on. Then we have realism, where you can use adaptation approach or interaction between and also the inductive and deductive. Can use any method suitable for the conducting research, definitely in realism. qualitative and quantitative, then can generalize. Interpretism, definitely it's more about inductive approach. You build on the theory. There's no theory there, then we need to build the theory. Can use case studies, ethnography, grounded theory, and so on. So I think those are the few summaries in regards to the philosophies. At least now, what I want us to do going forward, let's try to understand this terminology so that you use them in the correct way. And like I've said in the past, I've said that if you have a terminology and you want to use a term which you want to use in your study, read about it. So that after you've read and get an understanding about that terminology, then you can say, okay, this could be relevant to my writing up of my research. And it aligns to my study. Okay. The understanding is the most thing which you need to have. Okay. Interesting. We have covered, thank you, what we are supposed to cover, colleagues. And yeah, I'm hoping that now we are good about some of these terms and so on. Thanks for coming. And yeah, I really appreciate your attendance for today. Thank you, everyone, and bye.
Bye.